Ethan Carter had always been the kind of person who liked to wander. On weekends, when most people were busy with chores or glued to their screens, Ethan would grab his old backpack, fill it with water and snacks, and head out into the woods. He wasn't much of a hiker in the traditional sense. He didn't track miles or take pictures of scenic views. Instead, he walked because it gave him time to think, to escape the noise of his small town and the weight of his uneventful life. That Saturday morning was no different. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and damp earth. Ethan followed a trail he'd walked dozens of times before, but something about the forest felt different today. The usual chirping of birds was quieter, almost absent, and the sunlight filtering through the trees seemed dimmer, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Still, Ethan shrugged it off and kept moving, his boots crunching softly against the fallen leaves. About an hour into his walk, he noticed something unusual, a narrow path branching off from the main trail. It was overgrown with vines and barely visible, like it hadn't been used in years. Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to follow it. The deeper he went, the darker the forest became. The trees grew closer together, their gnarled branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. Just when he started to wonder if he should turn back, the path opened up into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a cave. Its entrance was partially hidden by moss and rocks, but there was no mistaking what it was. Something about it called to him, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the strange symbols carved into the stone above the opening, or the way the shadows inside seemed to shift even though there was no wind. Whatever it was, Ethan felt drawn to it, like a magnet pulling him forward. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The air inside the cave was cool and damp, and the only sound was the soft drip of water echoing in the darkness. He pulled out his phone to use the flashlight app, sweeping the beam across the walls. The light revealed more carvings, ancient runes that looked nothing like any language he'd ever seen. They glowed faintly, as if alive, pulsing with a soft golden light. At the back of the cave, Ethan found what looked like an altar. Resting on top of it was a sword. It wasn't just any sword. It was beautiful, with a blade that shimmered like liquid silver and a hilt wrapped in black leather. Runes similar to the ones on the walls spiraled along the length of the blade, glowing brighter as Ethan approached. Without thinking, he reached out and grasped the hilt. The moment his fingers closed around it, the world changed. A surge of energy shot through him, so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. Images flooded his mind, armies clashing under blood-red skies, towering castles crumbling into dust, and a voice speaking words he didn't understand but somehow knew were important. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left him breathless, his heart pounding like a drum. When it was over, Ethan stood there, staring at the sword in his hands. He didn't know what it meant or why it had reacted to him, but one thing was clear: his life would never be the same again. Ethan didn't stay in the cave for long. The strange energy that had surged through him when he touched the sword left him feeling uneasy, like something was watching him from the shadows. He quickly slid the sword into his backpack, careful not to let the sharp blade cut through the fabric, and hurried back toward the main trail. The forest seemed darker now, quieter, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, his nerves were on edge. When Ethan got home, he tried to act normal. He put the sword on his kitchen table and stared at it, unsure of what to do next. It didn't look dangerous, just an old, ornate weapon. But the way it glowed faintly in the dim light made him uneasy. He kept thinking about the visions he'd seen in the cave. They felt too real, too vivid to be just his imagination. For hours he sat there, turning the sword over in his hands, trying to make sense of everything. That night, things started to get stranger. As Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he heard a low hum coming from the kitchen. At first, he thought it was just the refrigerator, but when he went to check, he realized the sound was coming from the sword. It vibrated softly, almost like it was alive, and the rooms along the blade pulsed with a faint golden light. Ethan backed away, his heart racing. Before he could decide what to do, the lights in his house flickered, then went out completely. "Great," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Just what I needed." He grabbed a flashlight and shone it around the room, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the corners. But the house was empty. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and every creak of the floorboards made him jump. Finally, exhausted, he decided to go to bed, leaving the sword on the table. The next morning, Ethan woke up to a knock on his door. It was Lily Monroe, his neighbor from across the street. She was holding a cup of coffee and looked concerned. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "I saw your likes going crazy last night. Thought I'd check on you." Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to sound crazy, but he also didn't know how to explain what had happened. After a moment, he sighed and stepped aside, letting her in. "You're gonna think I'm nuts," he said, leading her to the kitchen. "But take a look at this." Lily's eyes widened when she saw the sword. It was still glowing faintly, though not as brightly as before. She set her coffee down and leaned closer, studying the runes. "What is this?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Where did you find it?" Ethan told her about the cave, the carvings, and the visions he'd experienced. He expected her to laugh or call him crazy, but instead, she listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. When he finished, she reached out and touched the blade cautiously. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the sword hummed louder, the runes flaring brightly for a split second. "Whoa," Lily whispered, pulling her hand back. "Okay, that's weird." "Weird doesn't even cover it," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what this thing is, but it's not normal. And honestly, I don't know what to do with it." Lily frowned, staring at the sword. "Maybe we should figure out where it came from. If it's ancient, there might be records or legends about it. You said the cave had symbols, right? Those could be clues." Ethan nodded slowly. He hadn't thought about researching it, but Lily's suggestion made sense. Still, there was one problem. "Even if we find something," he said, "it doesn't explain why it reacted to me, or why it's doing whatever this is." Before Lily could respond, a loud crash echoed from outside. Both of them froze, exchanging nervous glances. Ethan grabbed the sword instinctively, its weight strangely comforting in his hands. Together, they moved to the window and peered out cautiously. Standing in the middle of Ethan's yard were two men dressed in dark suits. They weren't saying anything, but their eyes were fixed on the house. "This just keeps getting better," Ethan muttered, gripping the sword tighter. Whatever was happening, one thing was clear. Picking up the sword had changed everything, and it wasn't done with him yet. Ethan's heart pounded as he stared at the two men in his yard. They stood motionless, their dark suits blending into the shadows of the late afternoon. Their faces were blank, almost emotionless, but their eyes darted around the property like predators searching for prey. Ethan tightened his grip on the sword, though he wasn't sure how much good it would do against two strangers who looked far more prepared than he was. "What do they want?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. She crouched low behind the window, trying to stay out of sight. "I don't know," Ethan replied quietly, "but I'm guessing it has something to do with this." He glanced down at the sword in his hands, its faint glow pulsing steadily. The hum he'd heard earlier had grown louder, almost like a warning. The men didn't move toward the house immediately. Instead, one of them pulled out a small device and began scanning the area. Ethan watched as the device lit up when it pointed in the direction of the kitchen. His stomach sank. Whatever they were looking for, they knew it was here. And they weren't leaving without it. "We need to get out of here," Lily said urgently. "If they're willing to break into your yard, they're not just going to knock on the door and ask nicely." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know where to go or what to do, but staying put felt like a bad idea. "Grab your phone," he told Lily. "We might need to call for help later." They moved quickly, slipping out the back door while keeping an eye on the front yard. The men were still focused on their device, giving Ethan and Lily a chance to slip away unnoticed. The forest behind Ethan's house stretched endlessly, and they decided it was their best bet for hiding. With the sword tucked under his arm, Ethan led the way, weaving between trees and ducking under low-hanging branches. As they ran, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the visions he'd seen in the cave. The battles, the castles, the strange voice. They all felt connected to the sword, but he still didn't understand why. Was it some kind of artifact? A weapon from another time? Or something even stranger? He wanted answers, but right now, survival came first. After nearly an hour of running, they finally stopped to catch their breath near a stream. The water gurgled softly, masking the sound of their heavy breathing. Lily sat down on a rock, pulling out her phone. "No signal," she muttered, frowning. "Of course." Ethan knelt by the stream, dipping his hands into the cold water to splash it on his face. His thoughts were a jumble, but one thing kept coming back to him. The voice from the vision. It had spoken words he didn't recognize, yet somehow he knew they were important. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the sound of it, and suddenly fragments of the dream returned. This time, the voice was clearer. "Long-lost king," it whispered. "The balance must be restored." Ethan opened his eyes, startled. "What did you say?" Lily asked, noticing the look on his face. "Nothing," Ethan replied hesitantly. "Just remembering something." Before Lily could press further, a rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. Both of them froze, staring at the spot where the noise had come from. Slowly, a figure emerged. A man, tall and wiry, with wild hair and glasses perched crookedly on his nose. He looked harmless enough, but there was something intense about his gaze. "You shouldn't have run," the man said, stepping closer. "But I suppose I can't blame you. Those men aren't exactly friendly." "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, holding the sword protectively in front of him. "My name is Ryan Dawson," the man replied calmly. "And if you're carrying that sword, then we need to talk. You've stumbled into something bigger than you realize." For a moment, Ethan didn't know whether to trust him, but something about Ryan's tone, earnest and urgent, made him lower the sword slightly. "Fine," he said. "Talk, but make it quick." Ryan nodded and began explaining. "The sword," he said, "was tied to an ancient order known as the Guardians of Eternity. According to legend, it was forged by celestial beings to protect humanity from otherworldly threats. Only someone chosen by fate could wield it, a person destined to unite fractured realms and restore balance." "And you think that's me?" Ethan asked skeptically. Ryan smiled faintly. "You tell me. Did you have any trouble pulling it from the stone?" Ethan hesitated. He hadn't thought about it before, but now that Ryan mentioned it, picking up the sword had been surprisingly easy, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Lily glanced between them, her expression uneasy. "So what happens now?" she asked. Ryan's smile faded. "Now we find somewhere safe, because those men chasing you, they work for someone who wants that sword, and they won't stop until they have it." Ethan, Lily, and Ryan moved quickly through the forest, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the men in suits. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the trees and making it harder to see where they were going. Ethan carried the sword tightly under his arm, its faint glow lighting their path just enough to keep them from tripping over roots or rocks. Despite the urgency of their situation, Ethan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm whenever he held the weapon. It was like it was guiding him somehow, though he didn't fully understand how. Ryan led the way, his steps confident despite the uneven terrain. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, even though none of them had been this deep into the woods before. "There's an old cabin up ahead," he explained over his shoulder. "It's abandoned, but it'll give us shelter for the night. We can figure out our next move there." Lily stayed close to Ethan, her eyes darting nervously around the forest. She kept glancing back, half expecting the men in suits to appear at any moment. "Do you think they're still following us?" she asked quietly. "They're persistent," Ryan replied without looking back. "But we've got a head start. If we're careful, we might lose them." The thought wasn't very comforting. Ethan tightened his grip on the sword, feeling its weight anchor him. He didn't know much about fighting, but he knew one thing. If those men came after them again, he wouldn't hesitate to use the sword to protect himself and Lily. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally reached the cabin. It was small and weathered, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Vines crept up the walls, and the windows were covered in grime. But it was better than nothing. Ryan pushed open the creaky door, revealing a dusty interior filled with old furniture and cobwebs. A fireplace stood in one corner, and a rickety table sat in the middle of the room. "This will do," Ryan said, brushing off a chair and sitting down. He pulled a map from his backpack and spread it across the table. "We need to decide where to go next." Ethan and Lily joined him, leaning over the map. Ryan pointed to a spot marked with a star. "This is where we are now," he said. "If we head north, we can reach a gateway, a place where the realms overlap. Crossing into another realm might be our best chance to stay ahead of whoever's chasing us." "Another realm?" Ethan repeated, frowning. "You mean, like another world?" Ryan nodded. "Exactly. The sword you're carrying isn't just a weapon. It's a key. It opens doors between worlds, but only if the wielder knows how to use it. That's why they want it so badly. In the wrong hands, it could cause chaos." Ethan stared at the sword, feeling its faint pulse against his palm. He still didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about him anymore. Whatever secrets the sword held, they were tied to something much bigger than his quiet life in the small town. As they discussed their plan, Lily noticed something outside the window. Her eyes widened, and she grabbed Ethan's arm. "Guys," she whispered urgently. "They're here." Everyone froze. Through the grimy glass, they could see shadows moving among the trees. The men in suits had found them. "We don't have time to run," Ryan said, standing up quickly. "We'll have to fight." Ethan swallowed hard. Fight. He didn't even know how to hold the sword properly, let alone use it in a battle. But as the front door burst open and two men stepped inside, their expressions cold and determined, Ethan realized he didn't have a choice. One of the men lunged at him, reaching for the sword. Instinctively, Ethan swung it forward, not thinking about what he was doing. To his shock, the blade flared with golden light, sending a wave of energy that knocked the man backward. He stumbled and fell, his body dissolving into ash before their eyes. "What just happened?" Lily gasped, staring at the spot where the man had been. "I told you," Ryan said grimly. "That sword isn't ordinary." The second man hesitated, clearly surprised by what he'd seen. But then he pulled out a strange device, a small orb glowing with a dark red light, and aimed it at Ethan. Before he could react, Ryan tackled him, knocking the orb from his hand. The two struggled briefly before Ryan managed to overpower the man, who fled into the night. Breathing heavily, Ethan lowered the sword, his hands trembling. He looked at Ryan and Lily, both of whom were staring at him with wide eyes. "I didn't mean to," he started, but his voice trailed off. "You did what you had to," Ryan said firmly. "And now you know. The sword responds to your will. It's powerful, but it's also dangerous. You'll need to learn how to control it if we're going to survive." Ethan nodded slowly, gripping the sword tighter. He didn't feel ready for any of this, but one thing was certain: his life would. The cabin was silent except for the sound of Ethan's heavy breathing. He stood in the middle of the room, still holding the sword, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. His hands trembled, not just from the adrenaline of the fight, but also from the weight of what he'd just done. The man had turned to ash right in front of him. It wasn't something he could easily forget. Lily sat on a dusty chair, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She kept glancing at the spot where the man had disappeared, as if expecting him to reappear at any moment. What asterisk was asterisk that? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan knelt by the fireplace, poking at the ashes left behind by the man. He didn't seem surprised by what had happened, which only made Ethan more uneasy. It's part of the sword's power, Ryan explained calmly. It doesn't just protect you. It judges those who threaten it. That man wasn't human, not entirely. Not human, Ethan repeated, his voice cracking slightly. What do you mean, not entirely? Ryan stood up, brushing dirt off his hands. There are forces at work here that most people don't understand. The men chasing us, they're servants of someone powerful, someone who wants the sword for themselves. They've been changed, corrupted. That's why they dissolve like that when the sword strikes them. Ethan stared at the weapon in his hands, feeling both awe and fear. It felt heavier now, not just physically but emotionally. So this thing decides who lives and who dies. Just like that. It responds to your intent, Ryan said. If you're protecting yourself or others, it acts accordingly. But be careful, you can't let anger or fear control you. The sword amplifies everything you feel. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't feel ready for this kind of responsibility. How could he possibly handle something so powerful? We need to keep moving, Ryan added, breaking the silence. They'll send more after us. We can't stay here. Lily nodded, standing up. Where do we go next? You mentioned a gateway earlier. Ryan unfolded the map again and pointed to a location farther north. There's an old temple near the mountains. It's abandoned now, but it used to be a meeting place for the Guardians of Eternity. If we can reach it, we might find answers. And maybe even allies. Ethan looked at the map, his mind racing. The idea of traveling deeper into unknown territory didn't sit well with him, but he knew they didn't have much choice. Staying put would only lead to more danger. All right, he said finally. Let's go. They packed up quickly, taking only what they needed. Ethan kept the sword close, its hum growing louder whenever they neared the edge of the forest. It was almost as if it was guiding them, nudging them in the right direction. Lily noticed it too and gave Ethan a curious glance, but she didn't say anything. As they walked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made him jump, his grip tightening on the sword. Ryan seemed unfazed, moving confidently through the trees, but even he glanced over his shoulder occasionally. By nightfall, they reached the base of the mountains. The air was colder here, and the ground was rocky and uneven. Up ahead, they could see the silhouette of the temple, a crumbling structure perched on a cliff overlooking the valley below. Its stone walls were covered in moss, and parts of it had collapsed over time, but it still looked imposing. This is it, Ryan said softly. Be careful. Places like this often have traps or guardians left behind to protect them. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding as they approached the entrance. Carvings similar to the ones in the cave adorned the doorway, glowing faintly in the moonlight. As they stepped inside, the sword reacted again, its runes flaring brightly. The light illuminated the interior, revealing statues of armored figures lining the walls and symbols etched into the floor. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, much like the one Ethan had found in the cave. On it rested a book bound in cracked leather. Ryan moved closer, examining it carefully. This is what we came for, he said, his voice filled with reverence. The Chronicles of Eternity. It contains knowledge about the sword, and about you. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he wanted to know what the book might reveal. But before he could decide, a low rumble echoed through the temple. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Looks like we're not alone, Ryan muttered, pulling out a small dagger. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Tall, cloaked individuals carrying weapons that shimmered unnaturally. Their faces were hidden, but their presence radiated hostility. "Well," Lily said nervously, clutching Ethan's arm, "I guess we're about to find out if this sword works on more than just suits." The cloaked figures moved slowly, their steps deliberate and measured. They formed a loose circle around Ethan, Lily, and Ryan, blocking any chance of escape. The air in the temple grew colder, and the faint glow from the sword seemed to be the only source of light now. Ethan's heart raced as he gripped the weapon tightly, his knuckles turning white. He didn't know how to fight, but he knew one thing. If these strangers wanted the sword, they'd have to take it from him. One of the figures stepped forward, lowering their hood just enough to reveal glowing, unnatural eyes. Their voice was low and raspy, like gravel grinding against stone. "You shouldn't have come here," they said. "That blade doesn't belong to you." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. "I don't think it belongs to you either," he shot back, surprised by how firm his voice sounded. The figure tilted their head slightly, as if amused. Brave words for someone who knows nothing of what they carry. They raised a hand, and the others tightened their circle, weapons at the ready. Ryan stepped forward, positioning himself between Ethan and the figures. "Leave them alone," he said sharply. "This is between us and the Guardian's legacy, not your kind." The leader laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the temple. "The Guardians are gone, old man. Their time has passed. Now it is ours to claim." Before anyone could react, the figure lunged, swinging a weapon that glowed with dark energy. Ryan barely managed to dodge, his dagger clashing against theirs with a sharp metallic ring. The other cloaked figures joined in, forcing Ethan and Lily to step back to back, the sword held defensively in front of them. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest, but then something strange happened. The sword began to hum louder, its runes flaring brightly. Images flashed in his mind, memories of battles fought long ago, faces of warriors cheering, and a voice whispering words of encouragement. It wasn't just a weapon, it was alive, guiding him. "Trust it," Ryan shouted from across the room, deflecting another blow. "Let it show you what to do." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the sword's vibrations. When he opened them again, the fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. As one of the cloaked figures charged at him, Ethan swung the sword instinctively. A wave of golden light erupted from the blade, knocking the attacker backward. They hit the wall with a thud, collapsing in a heap. Lily stared at him, wide-eyed. "Did you just?" "I think so," Ethan replied, his voice shaking. He didn't have time to process what had happened because another figure was already coming at him. This time, he was more prepared. The sword felt lighter in his hands, almost like an extension of his body. Each swing sent pulses of energy rippling outward, pushing back the attackers. Despite their numbers, the cloaked figures began to falter. The sword's power was overwhelming, and the glowing runes seemed to burn brighter with every strike. One by one, they retreated, disappearing into the shadows until only the leader remained. "You may have won this battle," the leader growled, their glowing eyes narrowing. "But the war is far from over. You cannot outrun destiny." With that, they vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. The temple felt emptier now, the oppressive weight lifted. Ethan lowered the sword, his arms trembling from exhaustion. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his legs felt like jelly, but he was alive. And so were Lily and Ryan. Ryan leaned against a pillar, clutching a wound on his arm. Blood seeped through his fingers, but he managed a weak smile. "Not bad for a beginner," he said, nodding toward Ethan. "Looks like the sword approves of you." Ethan shook his head, still trying to process everything. "I don't even know what I'm doing," he admitted. "It's like the sword is teaching me." "That's exactly what it's doing," Ryan replied. "It's testing you, showing you what you're capable of." But don't get too comfortable. Those trials will only get harder. Lily walked over to the pedestal where the ancient book lay untouched. She picked it up carefully, her hands trembling. "Do you think this will tell us more?" she asked, holding it out. Ryan nodded. "It might, but opening it isn't going to be easy. The Chronicles of Eternity aren't meant for just anyone." Ethan looked at the book, then at the sword in his hands. Everything about this journey felt impossible, but deep down, he knew he couldn't turn back. Whatever secrets the book held, whatever trials lay ahead, they were part of his path now, and somehow he would find a way to face them. The three of them sat in the dimly lit temple, the ancient book resting on the pedestal between them. The air was heavy with anticipation, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that opening it would change everything. Ryan examined the cover carefully, running his fingers over the cracked leather and the intricate symbols etched into it. "This isn't just a book," he said finally. "It's a key, a guide to understanding the sword and its purpose." Lily frowned, glancing at Ethan nervously. "What if it's dangerous? What if it's cursed or something?" "It might be," Ryan admitted, his tone serious. "But we don't have a choice. If we want answers about what's happening, and why those cloaked figures are after us, we need to take the risk." Ethan nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the sword. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Let me do it," he said quietly. "If the sword brought me here, maybe it'll protect me." Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be careful. Don't rush it. Let the book respond to you." Taking a deep breath, Ethan reached out and placed his hands on the cover. At first, nothing happened. But as he focused, the runes on the sword began to glow brighter, and the symbols on the book started to shimmer. A warm sensation spread through his palms, and the book opened on its own, revealing pages filled with glowing text. The words were written in a language Ethan didn't recognize, but somehow he understood them. They told stories of an ancient world, a realm where humans and celestial beings once lived together in harmony. Over time, greed and corruption tore the realms apart, creating fractures that allowed dark forces to rise. The sword, forged by the Guardians of Eternity, was created to restore balance and unite the fractured worlds under a single leader, the Warden. As Ethan flipped through the pages, one passage stood out. It described the Warden as someone chosen by fate, marked by the sword itself. Their task was to confront the darkness threatening all realms and bring peace. But the book also warned of trials, tests designed to prepare the Warden for their destiny. Each trial would force the wielder to face their fears, doubts, and past mistakes. "This is insane," Lily whispered, peering over Ethan's shoulder. "Are you saying you're supposed to save multiple worlds?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice trembling. "I'm just trying to survive right now." Ryan leaned closer, studying the glowing text. "It makes sense. The visions, the sword's power, it's all tied to you. You're the Warden, whether you like it or not." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the glowing runes on the book flared brightly. Suddenly, a beam of light shot upward from the pedestal, piercing the roof of the temple. The air crackled with energy, and a swirling portal appeared in front of them. "What's happening?" Lily asked, clutching Ethan's arm. "The book opened the gateway," Ryan explained, his eyes wide with awe. "This is our way out, but also our way forward." Ethan stared at the portal, his heart pounding. On the other side lay another world, one he knew nothing about. But staying here wasn't an option. The cloaked figures would return, and next time, they might not be so lucky. "We have to go," Ethan said firmly, stepping toward the portal. "It's the only way." Ryan grabbed his dagger and nodded, while Lily hesitated, clearly afraid. "We'll stick together," Ethan reassured her. "Whatever's on the other side, we'll face it as a team." With that, they stepped through the portal. The sensation was overwhelming, like being pulled through water and fire at the same time. Colors swirled around them, and the sound of rushing wind filled their ears. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. They found themselves standing in a barren wasteland. The sky was tinged with red, and jagged mountains loomed in the distance. Scattered across the landscape were ruins of what looked like castles and cities, their walls crumbling and covered in ash. The air smelled of smoke and decay, and the silence was deafening. "This place," Ryan muttered, looking around in disbelief. "It's worse than I imagined." Before they could process their surroundings, movement caught their attention. A group of people approached cautiously, dressed in mismatched armor and carrying makeshift weapons. One of them, a woman with fiery red hair and sharp green eyes, stepped forward. She studied Ethan closely, her gaze lingering on the sword in his hands. "You're him," she said, her voice filled with both hope and skepticism. "The Warden." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. "Who are you?" "My name is Sophia Bennett," she replied. "And if you're really who we've been waiting for, then you're the only one who can stop the Warden's fall." "The Warden's fall," Ethan repeated, confusion written all over his face. The three of them sat in the dimly lit temple, the ancient book resting on the pedestal between them. The air was heavy with anticipation, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that opening it would change everything. Ryan examined the cover carefully, running his fingers over the cracked leather and the intricate symbols etched into it. "This isn't just a book," he said finally. "It's a key, a guide to understanding the sword and its purpose." Lily frowned, glancing at Ethan nervously. "What if it's dangerous? What if it's cursed or something?" "It might be," Ryan admitted, his tone serious. "But we don't have a choice. If we want answers about what's happening, and why those cloaked figures are after us, we need to take the risk." Ethan nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the sword. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Let me do it," he said quietly. "If the sword brought me here, maybe it'll protect me." Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be careful. Don't rush it. Let the book respond to you." Taking a deep breath, Ethan reached out and placed his hands on the cover. At first, nothing happened. But as he focused, the runes on the sword began to glow brighter, and the symbols on the book started to shimmer. A warm sensation spread through his palms, and the book opened on its own, revealing pages filled with glowing text. The words were written in a language Ethan didn't recognize, but somehow he understood them. They told stories of an ancient world, a realm where humans and celestial beings once lived together in harmony. Over time, greed and corruption tore the realms apart, creating fractures that allowed dark forces to rise. The sword, forged by the guardians of eternity, was created to restore balance and unite the fractured worlds under a single leader, the Warden. As Ethan flipped through the pages, one passage stood out. It described the Warden as someone chosen by fate, marked by the sword itself. Their task was to confront the darkness threatening all realms and bring peace. But the book also warned of trials, tests designed to prepare the Warden for their destiny. Each trial would force the wielder to face their fears, doubts, and past mistakes. "This is insane," Lily whispered, peering over Ethan's shoulder. "Are you saying you're supposed to save multiple worlds?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, his voice trembling. "I'm just trying to survive right now." Ryan leaned closer, studying the glowing text. "It makes sense. The visions, the sword's power, it's all tied to you. You're the Warden, whether you like it or not." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the glowing runes on the book flared brightly. Suddenly, a beam of light shot upward from the pedestal, piercing the roof of the temple. The air crackled with energy, and a swirling portal appeared in front of them. "What's happening?" Lily asked, clutching Ethan's arm. "The book opened the gateway," Ryan explained, his eyes wide with awe. "This is our way out, but also our way forward. Ethan stared at the portal, his heart pounding. On the other side lay another world, one he knew nothing about. But staying here wasn't an option. The cloaked figures would return, and next time, they might not be so lucky. "We have to go," Ethan said firmly, stepping toward the portal. "It's the only way." Ryan grabbed his dagger and nodded, while Lily hesitated, clearly afraid. "We'll stick together," Ethan reassured her. "Whatever's on the other side, we'll face it as a team." With that, they stepped through the portal. The sensation was overwhelming, like being pulled through water and fire at the same time. Colors swirled around them, and the sound of rushing wind filled their ears. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. They found themselves standing in a barren wasteland. The sky was tinged with red, and jagged mountains loomed in the distance. Scattered across the landscape were ruins of what looked like castles and cities, their walls crumbling and covered in ash. The air smelled of smoke and decay, and the silence was deafening. "This place," Ryan muttered, looking around in disbelief. "It's worse than I imagined." Before they could process their surroundings, movement caught their attention. A group of people approached cautiously, dressed in mismatched armor and carrying makeshift weapons. One of them, a woman with fiery red hair and sharp green eyes, stepped forward. She studied Ethan closely, her gaze lingering on the sword in his hands. "You're him," she said, her voice filled with both hope and skepticism. "The Warden." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. "Who are you?" "My name is Sophia Bennett," she replied. "And if you're really who we've been waiting for, then you're the only one who can stop the Warden's fall." "The Warden's fall," Ethan repeated, confusion written all over his face. Sophia nodded grimly. "The darkness that corrupted your world has consumed ours. If you don't act soon, it'll spread even further and destroy everything." Ethan glanced at the sword, its faint glow seeming to pulse in agreement. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. The journey was far from over. Sophia Bennett led Ethan, Lily, and Ryan to a hidden camp nestled in the shadow of the jagged mountains. The group moved quickly, their footsteps crunching against the dry, cracked earth. Along the way, Sophia explained that her people had been fighting against the Warden's fall, a dark force that had consumed their world for years. "We've lost so much," she said bitterly, her voice heavy with grief. "Cities burned, families torn apart. If you're truly the Warden, then maybe, just maybe, there's still hope." Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't sure how to feel about being called the Warden, or what it meant for him to stop this darkness. All he knew was that every step deeper into this ruined world made his chest tighten with both fear and determination. The sword hummed softly in his hands, as if reminding him of its presence and his responsibility. When they reached the camp, Ethan saw rows of tents made from patched-together fabric and scraps of metal. Fires burned low, casting flickering light on weary faces. People stared at Ethan as he passed, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply watched in silence. It was clear they were clinging to hope, but not without doubt. Ryan pulled Ethan aside once they settled near one of the fires. "You need to be careful," he said quietly. "Not everyone here trusts you yet. They've been betrayed before." "I don't blame them," Ethan replied, glancing at the crowd. "I barely trust myself." Lily sat nearby, hugging her knees to her chest. She looked small and fragile in the harsh environment, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You can do this, Ethan. You've already come so far." Ethan smiled faintly at her words, though he didn't fully believe them. He felt like a stranger in a story he didn't understand, carrying a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. As the night wore on, tensions rose within the group. Ryan grew quieter, retreating into himself whenever anyone mentioned the sword or the prophecy. His doubts became obvious during a meeting with Sophia and her lieutenants. When asked about strategies to confront the Warden's fall, Ryan hesitated. "Are we sure Ethan is ready?" he questioned, his tone sharp. "This isn't just about wielding a sword. It's about leading an entire rebellion." Sophia frowned, clearly annoyed. "Do you have a better plan? We've waited centuries for someone like him. Are you saying we should give up now?" "No," Ryan snapped back. "But rushing into this blindly won't help anyone. What if he fails? What happens then?" The room fell silent, the weight of Ryan's words hanging in the air. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, feeling the pressure mounting. He wanted to defend himself, to prove Ryan wrong. But he couldn't deny the truth in his words. What if he wasn't strong enough? Later that night, Ryan disappeared. At first, Ethan thought he'd gone for a walk to clear his head. But when morning came and Ryan still hadn't returned, panic set in. A search party found him outside the camp, standing face to face with a cloaked figure, someone who radiated menace despite their calm demeanor. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said, their voice cold and smooth. "Your friends are fools to trust him." Ryan clenched his fists, his expression torn between anger and guilt. "I'm trying to save them," he shot back. "If you want the sword, take it, but leave them out of this." The figure chuckled darkly. "Oh, Ryan, you always were too soft. But fine, you'll get your wish. For now." Before Ryan could react, the figure raised a hand, and a wave of energy slammed into him, knocking him unconscious. By the time Ethan and the others arrived, the figure was gone, leaving behind only a message scrawled in glowing runes on the ground. Asterisk. "The warden will fall." Asterisk. Ethan knelt beside Ryan, shaken but determined. "He tried to protect us," Sophia said quietly. "Even after doubting you, he gave everything." Ethan nodded, gripping the sword tightly. "Then I won't let his sacrifice be wasted." With renewed resolve, Ethan stood, staring toward the horizon, where the enemy's fortress loomed. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, not just for himself, but for everyone who had placed their faith in him. The journey to the fortress was long and grueling. Ethan led the group, his steps heavy but determined. The sword in his hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile, as if it knew what lay ahead. The landscape around them grew darker, the air thicker with ash and smoke. Jagged cliffs loomed overhead, and the ground beneath their feet was littered with broken weapons and shattered armor, remnants of battles fought long ago. Lily stayed close to Ethan, her face pale but resolute. She didn't complain, even when her feet ached or her throat burned from thirst. Ryan's betrayal and ultimate sacrifice had shaken her deeply, but she refused to let fear take over. "We're doing this for him too," she whispered to Ethan one night as they rested by a dying fire. "For Ryan." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He hadn't spoken much since finding Ryan unconscious, but his silence spoke volumes. Every step he took felt like a promise, to honor Ryan's sacrifice and to fight for the people who had placed their hope in him. Sophia walked at the front of the group alongside Ethan, her fiery red hair catching the dim light of the moon. She carried herself with quiet strength, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "This is it," she said as they approached the fortress gates. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. He glanced at the sword, its runes glowing faintly. "But I'm not afraid anymore." The fortress was massive, its black stone walls stretching high into the sky. Chains hung from the towers, rattling ominously in the wind. At the entrance stood guards clad in dark armor, their faces hidden behind menacing masks. They didn't move to stop Ethan and his group. Their presence alone seemed to invite them forward, as if they were expected. Inside, the fortress was eerier than anything Ethan had ever seen. The halls were lined with statues of twisted figures, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Shadows danced along the walls, though there were no visible sources of light. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor and up into Ethan's chest. At the end of the main hall stood a massive throne made of obsidian. On it sat the warden's fall, or rather, the person who had become consumed by it. Their once human form was barely recognizable, their body warped and covered in pulsing veins of darkness. But their eyes were familiar. "It can't be," Ethan gasped, taking a step back. The figure smirked, rising slowly from the throne. "Surprised?" they asked, their voice distorted yet unmistakable. It was someone Ethan had known long ago, someone he had trusted. "You left me behind, Ethan. You abandoned me to this fate." Memories flooded back, images of laughter, friendship, loyalty. This person had been a companion, a confidant, but something had gone terribly wrong, twisting them into the monster standing before him now. "I didn't abandon you," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "I didn't know." "You should have," the figure spat, their tone icy. "You could have stopped this, but instead you ran, just like everyone else." Ethan tightened his grip on the sword, feeling its energy surge through him. "I'm here now," he said firmly, "and I won't run anymore." The battle that followed was unlike anything Ethan had experienced. The Warden's fall moved with unnatural speed, their strikes powerful enough to shake the ground. Each blow sent waves of dark energy rippling outward, forcing Ethan and his companions to dodge constantly. But the sword responded to Ethan's will, its golden light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. With every swing, Ethan felt stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. The trials the sword had put him through had prepared him for this moment. He faced his guilt, his doubts, and his fears head-on, letting them fuel his resolve instead of holding him back. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan found an opening. With a final, desperate strike, he plunged the sword into the Warden's fall's chest. A blinding light erupted, engulfing the room. When it faded, the figure was gone, replaced by a human silhouette collapsing to the ground. "Thank you," they whispered weakly, their true self restored for a brief moment. Then they were still. The fortress began to crumble around them, the darkness fading into light. Ethan turned to Lily and Sophia, relief washing over him. They'd done it, but the cost weighed heavily on his heart. The fortress collapsed around them, its dark walls cracking and crumbling as if the very foundation had been poisoned by the Warden's fall. Ethan grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the exit while Sophia covered their retreat, shouting orders to the others who had accompanied them. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding, but Ethan didn't stop moving. He could feel the sword humming faintly in his grip, guiding him forward like a compass pointing toward safety. When they finally burst out into the open, the red-tinged sky above seemed brighter than before. The oppressive weight of the fortress was gone, replaced by a sense of calm that spread across the land. The ground no longer felt barren. Tiny green shoots pushed through the ash-covered soil, reaching for the light. It was as if the world itself was healing. Ethan sank to his knees, exhausted but alive. His body ached from the fight, and his mind was heavy with everything he'd seen and done. Lily knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved everyone." "I don't know if I did," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. "I just kept going. That's all." Sophia joined them, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She looked at Ethan with gratitude, and something else. Respect. "You've given us a chance," she said. "A real one. For the first time in years, I believe we can rebuild." For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope, but it was fleeting. He thought about Ryan, about the person he'd once trusted who had become the Warden's fall. He thought about the cost of victory, the lives lost, the sacrifices made. Was it worth it? He wasn't sure. As the group regrouped outside the ruins of the fortress, Sophia turned to Ethan. "What will you do now?" she asked. "This world needs someone like you, someone strong enough to lead." Ethan shook his head, standing slowly. "I'm not a leader," he said firmly. "I never wanted this. All I wanted was to go home." Lily nodded in agreement. "He's right. We've been through so much already. Maybe it's time to let this world find its own path." Sophia hesitated, clearly disappointed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she handed Ethan a small crystal pendant. "Take this," she said. "It's a key to reopen the portal whenever you're ready. If you ever change your mind, or if you need help, you'll always have friends here." Ethan accepted the pendant, slipping it into his pocket. Then, without another word, he led Lily back toward the mountains where they'd first arrived. Ryan's dagger still hung at his side, a reminder of the man who had sacrificed everything for them. The sword remained in his hand, its glow dimmer now, almost peaceful. When they reached the spot where the portal had appeared before, Ethan paused, staring at the swirling gateway that opened before them. On the other side lay Earth, his home, his life. But it wouldn't be the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. "You don't have to decide right away," Lily said gently. "We can stay here if you want. Help them rebuild." Ethan shook his head. "No. I need to go back. There are things I left behind. Things I need to fix." He glanced at the sword one last time. "But I won't forget what happened here, or what I learned." With that, they stepped through the portal, leaving the fractured world behind. When they emerged on the other side, the forest was quiet, the sun warm on their faces. For the first time in days, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. Back home, life moved on as usual, but Ethan carried the weight of his journey with him. The sword stayed silent, tucked away in his backpack, but he knew it would always be there when needed. He wasn't just Ethan Carter anymore. He was the warden, the chosen one. And though he didn't fully understand what that meant yet, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, even ordinary people are meant for extraordinary things.